Are we ready to get started? Now, I know we got out early last week. I can't promise you anything tonight. I don't know. That was too fast last week, so I don't know what this will be. But anyway, I was setting these things up this evening, and I thought back to a time when I worked with a youth group several years ago. And my first youth night with them, I was standing here, and they were about as far back from here to Brenda, and they weren't going to move. We are not moving. So what I did was, I walked around here, and I stood right there. If the mountain go to Muhammad, Muhammad goes to the mountain. Years later, after they had grown up and were beginning to take on positions in the church, one of them said, her name was Angie, she told me, she said, that night when you did that, you won us, because I went to them. And I'm glad the Lord comes to us when we refuse to go to him. Otherwise, we wouldn't make it, for sure. Pastor had planned to take November off on Wednesday nights. Well, tonight, he and Sister Melanie both are having to do Wednesday night class duty with our kids. So that's where they are. So we go on with our Wednesday night in here. And I'd like to go ahead and start. Are there any prayer requests? Any different than what we've seen on text back and forth the last day or two?
Our great-granddaughter, she keeps breaking out at times, and her face is now swelling. They've had her to several doctors. They cannot find out what's going wrong with her.
Okay. All right, and Brenda has some good report from her family and friends today.
Yes, I have a very dear friend that had brain surgery this week, and she came out of the surgery, being able to move her limbs, and even speak some. And her brother-in-law that had to have emergency, I think it was colon surgery, and they say he's pretty well in the hospital, so we should be
That's good. It's good to hear about answered prayers. We thank the Lord for that. If you would stand, and Uncle, if you'll say our opening prayer, please, sir.
Dear Lord, we thank you so much for once again letting us be gathered together in fellowship and in teaching. Lord, we thank you so much that you are grateful to us, gracious to us that you give us this time. We pray tonight, Lord, that these requests that were brought up to us, we pray, Lord, that you will start ministering to these needs and healing and restoring all the things that are needed to be restored. We pray, Lord, that also you'll be with our teacher tonight as she brings forth the lesson, and let us get what we need to get from it. We pray in Jesus' name.
Thank you. I'll just mention this. We're coming up on Christmas, and you well know that. And the choir's working on our Christmas program. Y'all know we've had really awesome Christmas programs the last couple of years, and we want that tradition to continue, because we get people that come visit our church that night that can't probably come any other time. So pray that night, that service is anointed of the Lord, and pray for us that as we're working on those songs that we get it, that we get the songs, that we sing them the way they need to be sung, so it touches people's hearts. Yes, it's fun. Yes, we do our fun thing in the middle of it and all that, but it's about reaching souls and touching hearts, and we'd appreciate that prayer as you go. No, we're not going to do ouch, that hurts again, because it still hurts. But I do want to go back and review quickly what we did last week. So the next slide says we have all dealt with pain one way or another. We may have broken bones, we may have had this hurt, that hurt, whatever. And we know it's not just the physical pain. The next one shows that there's a whole listing of different things that can hurt us, things that aren't seen. Depression, anxiety, grief, being worried about being sick, worried about paying the bills, and let's just face it, everyday life. It can just be a pain. And then in the next one, we have several areas in our own country that are dealing with natural disasters. And those people need our prayers and our support. And not just from what I'm seeing, it's not just in our country. It's different places throughout the world. And that's, y'all know what it is when we've had hurricanes come through there, how much that hurts. And the destruction and the damage that's done. Then we talked about what makes us feel pain. There are parts in our body that are called nerves. And a bundle of nerves is called a neuron. And between the nerves and the neuron, those parts communicate with our brain and with our spinal cord to tell the rest of our body that we're in pain. So that's what's happening when you're feeling uncomfortable. Now, pain is communicated throughout the body through tissue injury. The brain signals something to the nervous system that something's wrong. Some people, they can't take much pain at all. Some people have a very high tolerance for pain. It just on how it feels, depends on how your body is wired. Then we talked about endorphin is the body's natural remedy for pain. Hold that thought as we go through the lesson tonight. Then there's several types of pain. There's acute pain that's just for a little while. Then chronic continues. It never stops until something's done about it. Then there's a nociceptive pain, that there's been damage caused by surgery or trauma, and then neuropathic has to deal with the nervous system. Then we talked about several ways to cope with pain, to exercise, to go to therapy, physical therapy, or whatever you need there, and in that physical movement, those endorphins are released, and that helps you cope with the pain better. Get support. When you're going through a tough time, there's always somebody you can talk with. If it's nothing but to say, pray for me, I'm really struggling. And, you know, I mentioned last week how there have been some of y'all that I've talked with. Is this what you expect? Is this what happens to you? It just helps you get through the time, get through the situation better. What pain level are you? 1 to 10, what do you got? Then find something that can distract you from that pain. Maybe it's a hobby, maybe it's something that you like to do, whatever, but find something that gets your mind off that discomfort. Unfortunately, sadly, some people turn to unhealthy ways of coping with pain, and we want to be sure that does not happen. Then our body is affected in many ways by pain. It affects your quality of life. You can get to where you're in so much pain, you don't want to do anything, you don't want to go anywhere, you don't want to be around anybody. And it affects your body physically. It affects your heart rate, your blood pressure, all those kinds of things. So pain is real. Pain is absolutely real. And sometimes the results of pain are scars. And we talked about that there are several different types of scars. Really can't see too much on those, but there are different types of scars. And this occurs because of some kind of injury. And I told you about those scars. Yeah, they don't look good, but they're also part of your story. Remember when you fell off your bike, or when you ran into the fence and you scratched your arm, or whatever. There's a story there. And where we've had surgeries or whatever, maybe that story is God healed me, God took me through it, God helped me to be better after that was done. So those scars can be a story. Then we talked about, you got to be kidding that pain is helpful. Good pain helps us know that something is wrong. It helps us to know that we've done some benefit to us from exercising because we get sore. However, if there is a pain that persists, if you keep a pain all the time, you need to get it addressed. You need to get some help with that. It shouldn't be ignored. Then we talked about how God can use our pain. When we're having to deal with pain, it tends to help us purify our belief in God. We find out what's important. We learn more about Him and what He can do for us if we let Him. It brings us closer to God because we have to rely on Him for help. We have compassion for others because we know what they're going through. And it prepares us to produce more fruit for the Lord. When you've gone through a bad time, whatever it is, it seems like there's always going to be somebody that comes along that's going through the same thing, you ever notice that? And you can go, yeah, but God got me through it. I know how you feel, and you can say it and you can mean it. God wants us to be still and know Him. And when you are down physically and sick, but be still. So you have to listen to Him. Remember, we talked about that God wastes nothing. He wastes nothing. And we talked about God's economy. Our sense of value and the importance of things, a little bit different than God's, because He knows the end from the beginning. And know this and remember this. On the other side of pain is joy. Okay, hold on to those things tonight for what we're going to be discussing. We talked about the pain of loss, the pain of betrayal, that Peter betrayed Jesus. We talked about that Mary, the mother of Jesus, watched her son on the cross and all the pain and suffering he had gone through. John, the beloved, knew the pain of loss because Jesus was a brother and a friend. And then the greatest picture of pain, of course, is Jesus. Now, this is where we're picking up tonight. Jesus encounters pain. Did He have pain? Yeah. He wasn't human, but he was human, part God. We know that. But He did experience pain. The verse is Matthew 23:37. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets, and stonest them which are sent unto thee. How often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and you would not. You were doing all this stuff when what I really wanted you to do was just come be with me. Just let me minister to you. Let me take away your pain. But they had their own ideas of what they wanted to do. Now, what I'm talking with you about tonight is nothing new to any of us. And as I was working on this, I was thinking, Lord, really? We're talking about the crucifixion almost at Christmas? But that's how this went. So that's what we're going to do. And remember back on Easter, we had Palm Sunday, and our folks brought in some palm leaves, and some brought in clothes, and they were distributed up here at the front. And on Palm Sunday, in Jesus' day, He rode in on the donkey. Did you know why Jesus rode in on a donkey instead of a horse? In Bible times, the donkey represented peace. He rode in on a donkey, so he was bringing in peace. If a ruler rode in on a horse, you know what it meant? War. So He came in on peace. And as He came into Jerusalem, they were hailing Him as a king because they thought He would do what other kings did. And what had other kings done? Those kings had tried to set people free. And they thought He would free them from their oppressors. Was that the plan? But they totally missed that He was the Messiah. He was the Messiah that was come to set them free, but not in the way they thought. Okay, this is on Sunday. And you know what happens by the following Sunday, so to speak? If we can look at it like that. By the time that week was over, did they still see Him as a king? No. Everything changed in a week. The crowd's adoration was gone. Then he rode into Jerusalem. Then, during that week, He participated in a painful meal with His disciples. It was a good thing, but it was painful. We can look at it from that perspective. Jesus wanted to be with His friends one more time before the events that lay ahead because He knew what was coming, and that was the Last Supper. He sent Peter and John to make preparations for the meal, which included getting the bread and the wine. So they took care of that, and they had a room that they were the only people in that room for this meal. So it was private. They could talk. Jesus could tell them what He needed to tell them. And as they were eating the bread and drinking the wine, Jesus told them He would be betrayed. And they all said, not me. I'll never deny you. Never, never. Judas and Peter were among those that said, I'll never deny you. Well, Then it was time to have communion. And they had the body, which was represented by the bread, and the blood that was represented by wine. And we've done that here as well. We've done communion here. Then Jesus knew what was next. He knew everything that was about to happen. And he knew of the nightmare that lay ahead. And it was time to pray. And it was going to be a difficult prayer. So Jesus and his disciples went to Gethsemane. We know this story. We know where they're going. So they got to Gethsemane, and he told his disciples to stay and pray. And he went a little ways further. He took Peter, James, and John with him and told them to stay here, and I'm going to go just a little further and pray. So there's Jesus, the three men, and then the remainder of the disciples. Okay, so he's got some prayer support here, maybe. And he told them to pray. He went a little further to pray, and he was overwhelmed and sorrowful. Have you ever prayed and felt very overwhelmed with what you were praying about? And that was just your life. That was just what you were dealing with. Can you imagine somebody praying for everything in the world, literally, of what was done, what had been done, and what needed to happen? Can you imagine the weight of that? He prayed that the cup would be taken from him, but he said, nevertheless, your will. Nevertheless, your will. So he went back to the disciples, and you know what? They were asleep. Now, they'd already had this meal, and they had walked to the garden. So, yeah, I can see why they would be tired. And, you know, sometimes I catch myself thinking, I wouldn't have done that. I'm just as human as they are. And I may have dozed off a little while too. But they had gone to sleep. He asked them again to pray with him, or pray as he prayed. And as he was praying, he said, Lord, take this cup from me. Nevertheless, I'll do your will. That's twice now he said that. And in the middle of all this praying, if I can say this right, there was a hematidrosis. We know this as bleeding while sweating. And the pain and the strain of that intense of crying can make your face bleed. Based on what I read, it can cause your face to bleed. So we've always heard about that bleeding, but I'd never seen the term on it. The third time, he went back and checked on them, and they were still just snoring away. So he said he'd go back and pray some more. And his praying turned into crying. His crying turned into weeping. Weeping turned into sweating, and his sweating turned into blood. So that was some rather intense praying. You know, as I was reading and studying on this, the Garden of Gethsemane has an very old growth of olive trees. You know, you pick the olives off the trees and you make oil out of it. Because when you put those olives in a press, somehow it presses the oil out. So Jesus can be compared to those olives. He was about to be pressed with what was ahead of him. And his blood was what was pressed out of him. Not the olive oil, but the blood. Now, he prayed about 3 hours. And he told the Lord 3 times, not my will, but yours. He had to keep saying that over and over and over again. Have you ever had to do that? You're in a situation you don't like it, but you know that's what you got to do, and you keep saying, not my will, Lord, but yours. Lord, keep giving me strength to get through this situation. Well, in the middle of all this eating and praying and all this, Judas had slipped away. And Jesus looks up, and here comes his frenemy, Judas. Judas had gone to the officials to betray Jesus. And along with Judas came some soldiers and the Pharisees. Do you know who the Pharisees were? The Pharisees were the Jewish leaders. Can you figure that out? What was Jesus? He was a Jew. And the Jewish leaders are coming with with the soldiers to get him. Jesus asked them for whom they were looking, and they said it was him. So he stood up, and he asked again, who are you looking for? And they said, you. So I think it's interesting that once he stood up, he remained calm throughout the entire remainder of the treatment that he was about to face. He was calm. He didn't get all upset, but he was calm through it all. Jesus told them to let his men go. You know, I'm here, you're going to take me, but let my men go. And in that process, what did old Peter do? He cut off the guard's ear. And in the middle of all that chaos, Jesus had to put the ear back on that man. Peter poor fella, he was overly, I can't even remember the word, but just really intense on making sure that he let the Lord know, let Jesus know that he loved him. We're going to find out about that. So Jesus got that ear fixed, and the soldiers took Jesus to the high priest and to Caiaphas. Now, the Jews didn't want to be responsible for Jesus being crucified. But you know what they did want? They wanted him gone. Figure that out. They didn't want their hands dirty. Well, Jesus was in the trial at night, and it was an illegal trial. But while this trial was going on, Peter was just outside the courtyard where that trial was going on. And somebody came up, and while Peter was sitting beside the fire, and they said, you were with him. You were one of his men. Not know him. And then somebody else came by. Hey, I saw you out there with him. Another one, I know you were in his group. No. And then what did Peter hear? He heard the cock crow. What must he have felt like when he realized that when Jesus said, you'll deny me, and he had said no? What did he feel like? What would you have felt like? It's like, I can't believe I did what I just did. But it happened. So, the Jews didn't want to do anything about it, but they wanted something done about it. So they sent Jesus to Pilate. Okay? But Pilate talked to Jesus, and he saw no reason for Jesus to be killed. Pilate told the Jews he would honor their tradition of releasing a prisoner. It's a tradition every year. And they didn't want Jesus. Pilate was going to release Jesus, but they didn't want Jesus. They wanted Barabbas. And there was probably somebody in the crowd that started saying, Barabbas, Barabbas. Well, guess what? Barabbas was released. But Jesus was flogged and beaten, and a crown of thorns was put on his head. And those crowns, or the thorns in that crown, from what I read, are about 3 inches long. And you know how sharp a needle or pen is? Can you imagine a crown made of things that sharp? I'm not telling you anything we don't already know. But sometimes I just need to be reminded of what he went through. And I hope I never have to go through that. So Jesus had gone through all this beating and flogging and everything, and Pilate told Jesus he had the power to release him. Pilate could have let Jesus go. But Jesus told Pilate, the only power that you have is what's given to you by heaven. In other words, Pilate really didn't have the authority to do anything in this case. The Jews said Jesus had to be crucified because he had claimed to be the Son of God, and that was against the rules. That's what he had done. Forget all the healing. Forget all the miracles he had performed. Just those words. They had to have been afraid of him because the people had flocked to him instead of them. So they were afraid. That's just my opinion. So Pilate consented for Jesus to be crucified. He was flogged again, and he was beaten with a whip that had metal balls in it, probably about like bearing size. Aren't they about that big? Glass, pottery, and every time that whip hit him, can you only imagine what happened to his back and how it was torn and bleeding? I saw some pictures that were very definite about what it looked like, and I thought that's just too much to look at for us to even see now. For us to have seen it at the time it happened, that would have been gory, that would have been gruesome, but that's what happened. Pilate tried again to give him back to the Jews, and they didn't want him. So he finally sent Jesus to be crucified. So they got him to the cross, and he had to carry his own cross. Now keep in mind, his back is torn and bleeding, and I bet horribly painful. He's got this crown on his head. He's probably got blood dripping down in his eyes and sweat. He didn't look good. But he was carrying this cross. He had to be struggling down the street, and the soldiers forced another man to come up and carry the cross for him. Pilate put a sign on the cross that said, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." The Pharisees didn't like that. And they tried to get Pilate to take that sign down or to change it. And Pilate said, "I'm not changing it. It's staying." So it makes me think maybe he realized who Jesus was. Somewhere along the way, he realized. Then, in the next one, what do you think Jesus was thinking about in that picture? What could he have been thinking about? Surely he was thinking about that he had prayed and that he had been with his people. And I'm just guessing maybe he thought my own people, the people I came to help, disowned me. Painful? I bet. My friends denied me, the ones that I thought would follow me. Peter was gone. Judas sold him out. The other disciples left. He was betrayed. He was scoffed at by people that he probably had taught and talked to. And the soldiers were making fun of him. "Yeah, you're a king, all right." He had a crown and he had a purple robe. He was a king. And he was abandoned. He had been left. But he reminded himself, "Not my will, but your will be done." Through all the pain, not my will, but yours. We have to continue holding to and remembering ourselves that it's God's will that we're working with, not ours. In this picture, what might these people be thinking? Now notice, behind the cross, you've got all those soldiers. See them? Then on this side of the cross, you see the people. And we will assume that Mary and John were probably pretty close to the cross, because Jesus talked to both of them in the process of all this. I bet those soldiers are thinking, "I sure do want that robe. I hope I win this gamble situation here." Greed. They want the robe. The soldiers mocked him. They pulled his beard. Probably what's been now a couple nights, probably since he shaved or whatever, and they had to be hurting. But things began to change. Okay? Remember how from about 9 o'clock in the morning till around noon, the sky was dark. The veil began to tear. It just tore. And from what I've learned about that veil through the years, that thing must have been extremely well made, very tightly woven. It wasn't supposed to tear. It wasn't built to tear. And then the rocks were shaken. I wonder if that was an earthquake. The rocks began to shake. Then all those people on both sides of that cross, I wonder if they were thinking, maybe he's who he said he was. Maybe I should have listened. Maybe I should have helped him, and I didn't. I stood there and laughed, or I went to the shadows and hid. The centurion, the soldier that was in charge of all that, he said, "Surely this was a righteous man. He was the Son of God." That man recognized what was going on. The thief, remember the thieves? There was one on either side of Jesus. One of them scoffed, said, "If you're a king, save yourself." The one on the other side, he said that, "I'm a sinner, but let me go with you." Now here's a man that was an admitted sinner, and he wanted to be with and he wanted to help Jesus hanging there on that cross. He couldn't run, but he didn't disavow what was going on. Some of the people in that crowd may have thought, as they looked at him, I talked with him. He healed me. I didn't believe him. And then, as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, what did Peter see in Jesus' eyes when Jesus looked at him after Peter had denied him 3 times? Can you imagine looking in the eyes of Jesus after you've denied or betrayed him? And Jesus didn't say anything, but Jesus knew. You talk about pain on both sides there, I bet there was. Then they nailed his arms and legs to the tree. In reading about this, I always thought they had put it in the palm of his hand, but in those times they considered the hand to go into the wrist. And the information said that they put the nails in his wrist. Ooh, that makes me hurt. And if you look there, you got blood vessels in there, and you got bones in there. So I can't even imagine what that felt like. And then they nailed his legs to the tree, and they gave him vinegar because he was thirsty. Can you imagine being given vinegar because you're thirsty? I don't think I could have swallowed that. And this spectacle, it was a spectacle. It was more like entertainment for these people. This spectacle lasted about 6 hours. In those years, the people had seen so many crucifixions, they really weren't affected by this one. The crucifixions had become commonplace. It's just another crucifixion, just another man. Excuse me, this wasn't just another crucifixion. This wasn't just another man. This was Jesus that had been prophesied. I like to read from Isaiah 53 because it really kind of brings it all. It's a bit of a read, but you'll understand why in just a minute. Isaiah 53. Who hath believed our report? And to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. And the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. That's what was going on in Gethsemane. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he openeth not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. And he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand, with the nail scars in it. He shall see of the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore will I divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he hath poured out his soul unto death. And he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bare the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. the Lord interceded for us so that we didn't have to go through all this. He did it for us. Now, how does what I've talked about tonight fit in with what we talked about last week? Let's look at it. The other side of pain. Yes, the cross was about salvation, but was that all that it was about? And we would agree salvation is at the top of importance. We got that. But what else did we learn from the experience of the cross? We learned that God never wastes anything. We learned God's economy, that our values are different than His. He sees things differently than we do. We were so important to Him that He was willing for blood to be spilled to save us and protect us from pain. Yeah, we still hurt sometimes, but if God hadn't done what He did, it would be worse. And even when we have it, we know He can intercede for us. Jesus endured the pain of betrayal. Look at all the people that betrayed Him, walked out, turned their back on Him, hid, whatever. He was betrayed. Have you ever been betrayed? It hurts. When somebody does something you didn't think they would do. He was abandoned. Everybody left Him. They just walked away. They denied knowing Him. Peter, I just can't get over how you must have felt after He said, I won't deny you. And He did it anyway. The physical pain of all those bones breaking and the loss of blood. And you know, he tried to keep breathing, but with his arms and his legs nailed the way they were, it was hard for him to breathe. He'd have to pull himself up and down and up and down, and the more he bled, the weaker he became. They made fun of him. It hurts to be made fun of. I think we probably all had that happen, at least when we were kids. It's not fun. He was accused of lying. Jesus was accused of lying. There was no lying in Him. He was only truth. And He was taunted by the rulers. You think you're God? Huh? What are you talking about? You think you're a king? I don't think so. You need to figure that out and go on. So, in light of all this, why did He do it? Would you have done something like this for people you didn't even know? There weren't going to be alive for generations. But He did it for our salvation. He did it because He loved us. And He did it to bear our pain. That's why He did it. And I don't know about you, but I'm glad He did. Because I'm sure we've all been through times that we didn't think we'd get through it. And the only way we did get through it was the grace, mercy, and love of God. And He helped us carry that problem. We couldn't have handled it by ourselves. Just couldn't have done it. So, well, made it a little bit longer tonight, about 10 minutes longer. But I hope this has made sense to you, that pain is part of life, but we have God to help us carry it. And know that as a church family, we're all here to help each other, to pray for each other, to be here for support. And I'm glad that we have the church family that we do. We enjoy being with one another. I get texts, I'm sure y'all do too, text all the time, flying, pray for so-and-so. That's good that we can communicate like that. And then we get to see the answered prayer. So, and with that, I'll say I appreciate your attention. I hope this has done something to help you. Pastor will be back soon. So, John, would you say our closing blessing? Thank you, ma'am. See you Sunday and pray for our service. Y'all have a good weekend.